Minister, how do you feel about that? I mean, it's been a big year.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you didn't hear the previous panel, but let me give you a little bit of an insight, is that they were pretty positive. How do you feel about it? You know, when you came here last year, and indeed in other forums, the IMF hadn't started, the bond issues hadn't been done, the currency was still a major issue. Just some of the milestones that you have passed in 12 months. Tell us the story, talk us through it, because there was a bit of skepticism, but I think now the markets perhaps are less skeptic than they were.
Maybe back then nothing was done except maybe passing the VAT law, the value-added tax law. I think it was in early September, first 10 days of September. But other than that, nothing was done. It was more, not speculation, but work in progress, and very tough work in progress back then. The question was if I come in the first anniversary of my position as a minister, that means March 2017. And I would prefer to take the anniversary of the interview rather than me taking the position. So between September last year and September this year, a lot was done. Of difficult decisions, of very important actions that have taken place, one by one. So in September, we've done the value-added tax law. Following that, we continued our negotiation back then with the IMF, and we completed that by the beginning of November. Also, the civil servant law has been approved. We have like a timeline of what we have done back then, and it was really too many actions. As I said, most important of which was basically the first 10 days of November when we had our agreement with the IMF. Before that, on the 3rd of November, it was a famous day because in the morning the central bank started to move on the currency, and in the afternoon we did the move on the oil price. So that was a very decisive day in really putting together the action that we wanted to do. And then a week later, the IMF approved our program, which is a 3-year program, which is important in light of Egypt's position back then and the situation that we were in, which was really very difficult to continue with. I think many in this room remember that the banking sector was almost dry of any foreign currency resources, and the entire FX regime was actually functioning outside the banking sector. So with what have happened, this has really returned back to the banking sector completely. No mention now of parallel market or black market, be it in Egypt or be it outside Egypt. That has become more of a history. And the more important factor in this regard is that basically the currency regime or the dealing with the current situation should be a function of the fact that currency should reflect the reality of the economy. Mm-hmm. Yep. Not the currency, not targeting a currency or not targeting a price. Whatever happens with the economy, not only economically but politically as well, should reflect on the currency, and this is basically what has been agreed on and implemented as well. Also, very important things happened in terms of subsidy, the most important of which is really addressing a very long overdue policy of dealing with the subsidy, and people were historically people were rather scared or very concerned on dealing with those issues. In fact, the policy adoption came since mid-2014 when President Sisi came to the office, where he started to put together a plan of really lifting subsidy over 5 years. Definitely this got interrupted by the level of devaluation that we have encountered, but case in point is that the government is very clear and very determined on dealing with those issues, because it is entirely unfair, and it is entirely inefficient kind of subsidy. And this year specifically, 17-18, what we have done when we increased the prices on June 29th, what we have done is that we made sure that restructuring the subsidy was taking out some of the energy subsidy, which is, in my opinion, unfair, and you give it to everyone in absolute way without really any distinction, and moved part of this saving into the subsidy, food subsidy, cash subsidy, Takaful Karama program, and so on. So that's a better direction or targeting of the funds we have. So we had number of laws being approved: value-added tax, civil servant law, industrial license law, investment law. Very important measures in terms of movement on the subsidy. And 16-17, we've also achieved the target that we want to achieve. Definitely deviated somehow from the original plan, but that came around because when devaluation took place, it really settled at higher prices than what we have expected, and hence we had to go back and revisit our numbers. But this is something that we have agreed on with IMF, and they have accepted this because factors did not came as we expected them.
If we can stay with the whole subsidy question, as you know, I mean, I've been coming to Egypt for 23, 24 years, and you know, Euromoney has been here longer than that. It's always been a question. You know, every conference, every article, at some point over the whole of this generation in which we've been involved, the subsidy question has come up. So it's not needing to address that has never been unusual. What is it that enabled your team to make this decision? I mean, we all know it's a really difficult political decision, even if it's necessary. What I'm trying to get to is what's different? You know, why now did you feel that you were able to do this?
Let me be honest with you and very straightforward. It's all about the president, okay? This is the difference in two regimes that I've been witness to both of them. Back in between 2003, 2004, previous Minister of Finance, Yusuf Garhy, back then put me at the head of the committee that calculates the subsidy action. And I've seen it year after year of how we shied away from dealing with a very important issue that put a lot of burden on the economy. My estimation to this figure between 2003 to 2014, this kind of subsidy have put a cost on the country of in the range of 700 billion Egyptian pound, staggering figure. You see it year in and year out of almost our productivity was at plateau of 700,000 barrel per day. Our production of natural gas was good back then, but the problem was that we have contracted at a very cheap price, and either for export or for some industrial projects. Then the value of this did not come around in a good way. So there was a fear on two files, or a conviction on one file and fear on the other file. There was a conviction that that every time we continue to fix the Egyptian pound against the dollar, that is a sign of how strong is the economy. Problem with this is that you do not lose only your reserve, but you weaken the entire system around it. And I've said this many times before. If you look at a country like Egypt with export level of $20 billion, and you compare it to countries which we can consider ourselves in the same category, more or less, Turkey, Indonesia, South Africa, and other countries where their export level goes above $150 billion and above $200 billion a year, and we are only at a very moderate figure of $20 billion. That means that we have never engaged properly as a country in terms of our capability for industry and so on to go abroad, and we've been relying on tourism in a very big way. I think this time around, what we have to be very careful about is the level at which we need to basically improve our industrial basis, improve our engagement with the world in terms of what we can do in terms of export business, how we can deal with the trade deficit, how we can narrow it as much as possible. We cannot live in a way, hostage to what may happen in tourism. We have very, incredible capability in the tourism, but I'm not here talking about the quality of production or products in terms of tourism or quality of service, but I'm talking about risks that are beyond our control at a certain point in time. The other thing is dealing with the prices that the government sell its products or services to the public. I think we lived for a very long period of time, offering services to the public at prices. At the beginning, maybe they were okay, but as time goes by and cost elements increases, cost of investment increases, cost of operation, cost of labor, cost of debt, many sectors have fallen under tremendous pressure, and they became in a very bad shape. And we cannot continue like this. Everyone in the room definitely knows that the oil sector has been suffering issues with repayment to partners as well. So it weakens the system. It puts you under pressure in terms of really directing expenses either to investment or development of human capital, in terms of education, in terms of health, so on and so forth. And in the process of doing that came the revolution, and what happened after that put Egypt under great pressure, and the things that have happened since then that have taken our debt level to more than 100% now in relation to GDP. So the difference this time around, it is the president, it is the regime. Maybe the difference between a regime that wanted to wait, didn't want to deal with not very populist kind of decision, versus a regime that is does not compromise on anything. The right things will happen. We'll do the right things. We'll put things on the right path.
So we could call it. Could I use the word courage? This regime has courage. You know, it knows it needs to take difficult decisions. Would that be fair?
Has a lot of courage, and has a very strong vision as well. Because it's when you believe that you can do these things, it gives you clarity on what you can project, and what do you think you have to do in terms of development of the country, and this is in itself is very important. Definitely we do these things, but at the same time we're very careful about the impact on the social part or the social angle of the story, and that's why we put together this year a social protection package of 85 billion Egyptian pound increase over the last year, very nicely distributed. It did not address only government employees, because sometimes you fall in this mistake. It happened post-revolution that the entire focus was with the government employees and forgetting about a lot of group in the economy. So this time it was very well distributed as well.
As far as you can tell, the reception by the people of that change in the way that you, I mean, I don't like the word subsidies, but you know, you're not leaving people behind, but you're changing the way in which that sum is distributed. Are they responsive to this? I mean, do they understand what the government is doing? Because that was always an issue before, is that You know, if we take away, there will be, you know, more political unrest.
For sure, it was difficult. For sure, there were severe complaints about the price hike that have taken place. But at the same time, and that's why the government was very alert when we were preparing the budget for this year to make sure that enough is going. Enough on the basis of what we can do or we can make available, but maybe not enough to make people live in the best shape and way possible. But at the same time, you push a big package as much as you can in order to shield groups of the society that can deal with that. When you talk about subsidy or oil subsidy or oil product subsidy, we definitely give the example of maybe someone who owns 3 or 4 cars. You could be given this person like 15 or 20,000 Egyptian pound of subsidy, which he doesn't need. Okay, and at the same time he never asked for them. You compare him with someone who has very limited resources. You don't give him this money, so the redistribution becomes much more efficient when you get to that.
I think it's fair to say, and I think our audience would agree with us, that the credibility of the administration of your role as Minister of Finance has been established over the last year because, you know, you said what you were going to do and you did it. I mean, simple, but not easy. So let's have a look. I mean, I'd like to have your opinion on some of the issues that still remain. We've been talking about them this morning. Could you put up that poll? But you'll know what they are. The inflation, hot money, as they call it, that sort of stuff. If you can see that, this is what our audience, this is a live poll. We asked them which one of those they felt was the biggest risk. And geopolitics, global economic slowdown. You can still vote, by the way, so if you want to put your app up. Over-reliance on foreign debt, we interpret that as the hot money issue. And failure to maintain the reform momentum, which our panel, it must be said, thought was a little unfair. But it also showed that the focus is very domestic. There is still anxiety. So let's, you know, I think, you know, what are you going to be doing over the next 12 months? What are the major targets?
Failure to maintain the reform momentum is the risk that I fear the most. This is something that we have to be very careful about. The thing is that you need to continue what you...
See, look, it's already gone down.
Okay.
Sorry.
If you're asking me about my opinion in this. Okay.
Really, I mean, it was just a callback to the previous panel.
Okay.
Do you feel that it's a little unfair that the people think that the failure is to maintain this?
I mean, we will not be able to implement that. No, we'll continue to. Continue to put that into.
And what's the next? You know, people say failure to maintain the reform momentum. So forget the failure bit. What's the reform momentum? What's next in your list of priorities? I mean, you have a very strong record of promising and delivering.
Yeah.
So we need to hear what's next on your list of things to do in 2018.
Look, we need to be disciplined, to continue to be disciplined in what we are doing. We need to look at all factors that can derail us from really implementing what we want to do. There is internal factor, but there is also external factor. When we say that we have done so much on the subsidy, but this also happens in light of maybe price per barrel, the price of oil at the current level. Remember one thing, that whatever level of subsidy we have on the energy is also a function of the price of oil, because we are net importer. And had we continued in the same level that oil prices had been at $100 and $115, we would have been under a much difficult situation in terms of budget deficit, in terms of also trade deficit and balance of payment as well. So whatever we achieve and whatever we continue to work to achieve is also a function of the surrounding factor, the global factors. On fact that we will continue to advance our reform agenda, we'll continue to do that. The work is on the control of the expense items. What we need to do is to respect the budget, to respect the different expense items of the budget. We might deviate on the interest expense this year, but other than that, we have to continue to be very disciplined on the expense item. On the revenue item, we're working well with the taxes. Definitely, there are things that happened that helped us in increasing the tax level, like the application of the value-added tax law. The devaluation have also resulted in certain kick-up in some of the tax items, but at the same time, the tax administration reform is going well, and we see a lot of activity and improvement in tax to GDP as a percentage, and this is happening as well.
So, controlling expenses or costs or expenditure and increasing the efficiency of tax collection, because you're not hiking taxes, really.
No, we're not.
You're just collecting the ones that are already owed to you.
No,
is that?
Look, in fact, we were in a good position prior to 2011 in terms of total tax, including customs for sure, to GDP. We're at a better percentage than what we are in right now. But post-revolution, what happened is that there has been a huge turnover, the ministers and heads of authorities, so on and so forth. So there was no stability. Okay, but this time around, we have much more stability, putting a better structure in the tax authority in terms of management. We have a big team inside the ministry as well, in order to ensure that performance is going on in a very good way. Even when I came to the ministry, I did not come as a single person. I came with 3 deputies, each of them responsible for a very important file. 2 of them here today, Amr, responsible for the taxes, and Ahmed for macroeconomic policies and all the international relationships. So we came as a big team, and we continue to empower this and to bring more people in order to ensure that we have enough resources to do that.
Is there, I mean, this is a slightly naughty question, but is there more acceptance among people that they need to pay the tax that they owe? Because it was always a little bit of a sport in Egypt. It's a sport everywhere, but it was always a little bit of a sport, because the system was inefficient, and it was always a worry of mine that maybe people didn't particularly want to pay tax. Do you feel that now actually people realize, to have a functioning society, to have a stable, cohesive society, we do all have to pay our way? Do you see a change in people's attitudes towards that?
Look, if people can avoid taxes, they will avoid taxes. Okay, there's no question about that. It's a fact that it's a law. It's something that people have to pay. There is a law.
But there are laws and there are laws.
Look, we have still weak points in this. We have people go into some sort of not standoff, but differences between the tax authority and the taxpayer, and then we go to make a complaint, and we wait for a judgment by certain committees. These might take ages, and at the end of the day, it might be paid after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. This is inefficient, and this is what we are going to work on in order to make sure that this process happens quickly and to accelerate collection of taxes. And we're seeing a very good result so far coming out of that.
And that really stems from improving stability within the system and improving the efficiency of the agencies and the bodies. Yeah. Inflation. I know that you're not the central bank governor. I've done my research.
We can't speak about
I'm really terribly professional. But
nothing is reserved to someone. We can.
But it's something that's come up a lot. Now, obviously there's a base thing, and the currency revaluation in November last year. There's going to be these effects. But inflation in Egypt has always been stubbornly high. And as one of our previous panels said, it's not simply a question of pushing up interest rates to a very high level. There's got to be an action on the supply side. Is that one of the major challenges of the government, of the economic policy of the government, is to try and get that rate really to become structurally lower?
Oh, yeah. Because this is probably also the #1 enemy to the budget. Because if you continue at a high inflation rate, what will happen is that the budget will eventually pay for it. So you pay for it one way or the other. For sure, the inflation came in such a way because we were living in illusions, okay? If you look at our financial performance or the budget performance since 2011 and onward, it was only a function of borrowing money to give it to people so people can pay. So you're living out of addicted to that. We became addicted to that. Take that. People have a lot of requests. You have to satisfy their requests regardless of your respect to the budget or your respect to your macroeconomic figure. And delays in dealing with the FX regime. And then to add more insult to the injury, the Russian accident took place, and then revenues from tourism have taken a very hard hit as well. And this accelerated what happened between 2015 and 2016. And then the inflation rate thereafter, given the situation that we have reached, the market were suffering severe irregularities and great disruptions. Where you have probably traders holding up or holding back commodities to sell it at higher prices. Importation and trade operation were not happening at the best shape. If you compare what happened between November and the 6-7 months following to that, and what happens and what's happening today on the ground, productivity is back on track. Trade is functioning in a very normal way, and hence we're starting to see stabilization and stability in the prices because productivity came back to the front. So and that's why in the last months after the impact of oil prices increase on the inflation figure of July, we retreated back again to 1.1% in August, and we believe that this will continue to happen. So for us, it's very important that inflation figures would go down fairly quickly, so that we'll start taking with it interest rate also down, because high interest rate is for now difficult for businesses and difficult for somehow for the budget, but it's very important to make sure that the inflation is being controlled at a very reasonable level.
One of the things that we've talked about, and in fact, the reason I was looking at my phone was because I saw that you were being quoted on Reuters this morning, but you had a very successful Eurobond issue, unleashing the beast, as my friend Chris called it. The international markets are receptive to Egyptian debt, which is fantastic. What's in terms of the way that you intend to finance the deficit over the next year, 18 months, what's the balance between domestic and international? How important is the international component of that? And does the fact that you've got foreign currency denominated debt, does it worry you at all? Are there any risks that you can see for that? Because some people perceive there to be a risk in that.
For sure, but our taking of foreign currency debt is to finance a financing gap that exists. That's one thing. And two, I mean, before November 3rd, if we pick up a phone call and an investor, that would be a very difficult thing. Thereafter, we've seen a huge demand, not only from T-bills, because people spoke about T-bills, and this is the best deal on earth, maybe after Argentina, so on and so forth. We have seen this before. We have seen it back in 1990, and we have seen it at different times. No matter how high are your interest expense, investor will only come if your economic reform and management of the economy is happening in the right way. So if you put it at 20 or 25% or even 40%, if you're not doing the right thing, they will never come in. We've seen a very good level of demand on local T-bills, and we've seen even much more interest on our sovereign. We started in January 2017, and then we retapped in May. We raised $7 billion on an order book of $23 billion. So there is a lot of confidence what we are doing. In terms of the mix between Egyptian pound and foreign currency, we definitely follow certain rules in terms of where we stand in terms of foreign debt to GDP, and we will always make sure that we are at the comfort zone when it comes to the level of debt intake. That means very simple equation of the starting balance of the year, and then the level of intake, and then the level of loading of debt, and the end of the year, in order to be sure that we are always at non-risky within a comfort zone in terms of risk of foreign currency debt to GDP. But the more important factor is that we have to make sure that the economy itself is productive of foreign currency revenues, either through a better operation on our industrial basis, if tourism comes back, if our local productivity increase at a level that makes us not reliant on importation, because in the last 5 years prior to November 2016, we have relied on importation in a very big way on the back of currency that was put in a much stronger position than one where it had to be back then. So I only fear on two things. If our anxiety for borrowing in foreign currency goes unlimited and uncontrolled, that is one risk. The other risk, if the economy does not function in a way that it can produce more foreign currency and more in terms of what we sell, and also more FDIs that would come to the country.
I want to come on to FDI, but I have one final question on the foreign external debt. This report, which is CNBC, actually not Reuters, says that you're having a $10 billion program. Now, I'm not really worried about the 10 billion. What I'm interested in is the word program, because Egypt's international issuance in the past has always been, I think it's unfair to call it opportunistic, but it's not regular, structured tapping of the capital markets. The country has not spent time and effort building itself as a known credit like other sovereigns. Are we seeing, is this something new that we're going to see, that you're going to have a more systematic approach to tapping the international markets?
We'll continue to look at that with the level of balance that we want to achieve.
Sure.
It's not only a function of let's just go and have debt from abroad. It depends on our need to cover any financing gap on one hand. Remember that we raise money from international markets. In a way, if the economy is functioning in a good way, that means that we can make some gain out of the interest rate differential as well. That brings more liquidity to the market, and it really puts some pressure on the local currency interest rate as well. So we're diversifying our needs and diversifying our resources of financing. The other thing on the last year interview, I've said that I want to see the economy functioning at full speed. It's very important to note also that the Purchasing Manager Index back in October 2016, we were at a level of 41, between 41 and 42, and this was actually very weak, and it reflects the economy that's almost coming to a halt. Now, the last month report came at almost 49, where we're 1 point away from achieving 50, and when we achieve 50, that means that the economy is functioning in a much more robust way. Last quarter of the year also, we've achieved economic growth of 5%, and that's why we expect that this year we can see somewhere between 5 to 5.25%.
I was going to ask you that. Was my next question. You're reading my notes. I have to hide them from you. Let's talk about FDI. Let's talk about economic structure in the broader sense. And we've got 10 or so minutes left. Let's begin to start sketching out the future path of the country. Response on FDI, particularly in energy. Now, energy. I was having a little argument with one of my panelists about this. It's all good. Don't get me wrong. If you're going to have anything is better than nothing. But energy is. It's vitally important for the macro picture, but it's less of an indication of the underlying attractiveness of the economy. It comes because it's not dependent on certain things. It tends to be the first type of FDI in there. So it's a great start. Congratulations, fantastic. I saw there was an announcement this morning. What is the plan for more? Unfortunately, Saha's not here to answer that question, so you should answer that question. How are we going to get the FDI up? Where's it going to come from? What are the sectors? And what do you think the government needs to do to make Egypt, once again, a place that has a reputation as a good home for direct investment?
Look, I expect that we will see a good level of FDI coming to the country. The level of inquiry, the level of companies, investors that comes to the country is rising rapidly. The level of interest is very clear. So I should expect once you put the platform in a good shape, that will facilitate a lot of things. We've issued the investment law, and the executive regulation has been also completed. But the most important thing is the execution on the ground of making sure that things are done in a very efficient way, speedy process, efficiency, and really putting together the requirements of the investor. Definitely, with the expected receding of the interest, it will also help people to see things in a much better way. Although when investors come to the country, he does not really build his assumption on what's happening within 3 months or 6 months, because whoever comes looks at 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years as well. So I'm expecting to see a very good activity on that part. The other thing is Egypt has a very diversified economy. Okay, so I expect this to happen across most of the sectors. Definitely infrastructure is still, Egypt is hugely underinvested in infrastructure, so we should see a lot of that happening in the coming period of time. And also what we want to make sure is that investment happens in the areas where employment can happen. We have done some mistakes in between 2002 and 2010 of really giving a lot of investment to high energy consumption type of operation in comparison to high labor intensive kind of projects as well. So we've been in discussion, we've been in the economic ministerial committee, and we've been discussing what we need to do in order to avail land to manufacturing, making sure that small and medium enterprise operation takes off in a strong way. So the work will happen all across the board to make sure that investment come to the country, but usually FDI lags. It takes time. Investors come to the country, make sure that whatever economic reform that we are doing is being done in a comprehensive way, and that it will continue to happen over time.
Yeah, I mean, it lags, but it's sticky. That's the theory, anyway. In terms of sectors, and I agree with you completely, obviously, that one of Egypt's many strengths is it's a genuinely diversified economy. But two sectors that came up in discussion this morning repeatedly were healthcare and education. Now that's the sort of soft infrastructure, if you will. There are still constraints as to the role that foreign investors can play in those sectors, for understandable reasons. I mean, you've got to have control over your own education sector and stuff like that. but would you see perhaps there's any chance of those restrictions being loosened, that there'll be a more pragmatic attitude from the administration towards investment in that sort of type of, national sector that's vitally important to provide the social infrastructure for the future?
Of course, we need that, and if there are any, I mean, there are definitely restrictions, and there's definitely could be some red tapes that exist in such kind of operation, and I'm sure the government is more than willing to definitely help in eliminating any restriction or any constraints on investment on those fields. They are vitally very important, and they should expand, because we still have problem with our level of education and the way the education is being structured and handled as well. Things should improve on that front in a very big way.
And they're also, relatively speaking, high employment sectors. I mean, you need service industries, you need social infrastructure.
True.
Going forward, let's go forward 5 years or more. The government has talked about this. Everyone has one, Vision 2030, Egypt in 20 years' time, Egypt in 10 years' time. One of the things that I noticed about that, and I realize it's a vision document, it's not a specific thing, no one can predict things to that far out. But it seemed to me that Egypt was looking at areas like manufacturing for export, which, if you are to believe the consultants of today, are industries that are going to be automated or are going to have more local content. We all have 3D printers. Why do we need an Egyptian television if we can print one? How do you, as a policymaker, think about that level of the future? I mean, you're building an economy now which really a lot of the things you're doing now aren't going to become reality until 5 years, and some of them, their real effect is going to be 15 years from now. What is how do you approach those big issues? I mean, are you thinking about the longer term future of the economy? And if so, what is that vision for how Egypt should be economically?
Basically, we need to make sure that the economy is being activated in a robust way, and then definitely there are changes on the technology front. You see in Egypt jobs that when you go into other countries, they do not exist. If you go into a gas station or what have you, there's no people in the gas station. If you go into a gas station in Egypt, you could find 40 or 50 people exist. So you could be talking about difference in really approaching many industries. Technology is taking over in a very big way. If you look at the 5 biggest technology companies in the world, between them, they make more than $3 trillion of market cap. If you take Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Amazon, the 5 of them are in excess of $3 trillion. I was looking at my indexes today. The difference in market cap between Apple and Google is almost JP Morgan Chase. Okay, so if you see the difference between the two. So technology is taking over the world in a very big way. We have to be very well prepared for that, and we have a big challenge in terms of employment. All what we're doing is at the end of the day to create jobs and to reduce basically the unemployment rate. We are at 11.9%, and there could be pockets also of unemployment, but some sort of disguised unemployment. So we have a very big challenge, and we have a big challenge of those who are coming to the job market every year of 700,000. If we continue with the same pace of increasing population, those could be 1 million a year in 10 or 15 years' time, and this is a very big number. The number one is to make sure that your industrial base becomes bigger, that you engage in the world arena in terms of productivity, and in the process you watch very closely and monitor the changes in technology. And before this and that is for us how to control the population growth. Because if we continue like this, every 10 years, we add a country in the size of Australia. Every 25 years, we add a country in the size of Australia and Canada. For us to do that or to continue like this will put a lot of burden on the country and on the economy as well. So this is another very important factor that we have to take care of. But what we need to start with is to make sure that the entire economy functions in an efficient way, the different parts of the economy functions in an efficient way, industry on the side, and we don't have to mix or intersect between the different economies. Every file has to go on its own with the reform that's needed to be witnessed in each and every reform, regardless of what happens in the other sector. Definitely, you make the coordination, but you want to make sure that reform happens in all sectors, not only fiscal and monetary reform, but structural reform as well, and sectoral reform.
Let's, I think, end on perhaps some of the most important things and to come back to what I perceive to be a significant difference between this administration and ones in the past. And it is this sort of social cohesion, inclusion, all of that. Now, these are lovely words. Everyone, no one is ever going to say, no, we don't want financial inclusion. And that always makes me a little suspicious because, it's a great thing to say, but no one really knows what it means and no one really knows what to do. Right from the very beginning of President Sisi's term, he's made this a priority. We talked about it in terms of subsidy. How does it fit into what you do at the Ministry of Finance? What are your goals to ensure that a wider group of people are included economically, financially, socially in the economy? And I don't mean just in terms of general policy. I mean, specific things that the ministry, your team does to help with that overall policy goal.
The most important thing when it comes, look, definitely as Ministry of Finance, where we take money from people. Okay, so in terms of inclusion from a revenue point of view, the VAT by law, everybody should be included with the exception.
Everybody should be included.
Exactly. But if I take it in differently, what should happen is that from a policy point of view, that in order to include more people into the economy, that we have to do simple things. And simple things, if people is gonna do it, they have to receive against it some privileges as well, in order to encourage people to come into the system without a burden, without heavy burden. But at the same time, they can make some benefit out of that, of being legal, of being properly registered, of being having some sort of work permits, right ones, electricity and other services that are done in a good way, not to be exposed to any pressure from any parts of the business community, so that they can operate in a more simple and straightforward way and apparent way as well, in order not to be subjected to any pressure. So we are working on a simplified tax regime for small and medium enterprises. You have those with, they don't have the ability to prepare financials and balance sheet, and they will not have like a legal auditors, things like that. So we have to put together a simple system for that, and also the automation of a lot of operation. We have automated the budget almost completely. We'll be finalizing that by March 2018 on one part, and on the other part we have almost all wages and all pensions are now operating with cards, wages cards.
Sure.
So this is also put electronically in a very good way. So the idea of having more of an information-based type of operation is is happening, and we're making a lot of interaction and interfacing between the different parts of the economy. If you talk about real estate tax, income tax and value-added tax, electricity payment, all that stuff will give us more information on how to include people much more. But we want to simplify for the small businesses the way we deal with taxes, and we have to differentiate between those who are evading taxes and those who cannot deal with such a complicated issue.
So final question, and very much in where we, to go full circle to where we started. What would you say are your one or two policy priorities for the next 12 months? So if, as I hope is the case, we're both sitting here on this stage in a year's time, what would you like to have achieved?
Simply speaking, to continue the trend that we're having on the budget deficit, and more importantly, not the overall deficit, the primary deficit. The next thing is to make sure that we're taking our level of debt in terms of relation to the GDP at a downward path. That should happen of two things: more control and achieving and reducing the primary deficit and starting achieving a primary surplus. And then the other thing, the more you reduce your budget deficit, the more inflation goes down, and then interest goes down, and hence we control our debt. We have to take it to a more manageable level. At the same time, growth in the economy takes place in a nice way. What's very important for us is to, I don't want to fancy myself and the rest that we want to achieve 7 and 8% and things like that. What we want to do is 6%, but on a longer term and sustainable way. What we suffered historically is that we make reform, and then 2-3 years later you fall in a trap, you fall in a big mistake, and you suffer from that a big way, and then you wait for 4 or 5 years until you recorrect that and you readdress that in a good way. So you're always on a roller coaster. You're not achieving any stability in terms of the progress that you want to achieve.
I think that's a very laudable goal, Your Excellency, and I think that we have every reason to hope and to believe that this administration is well placed to achieve that. So thank you from us. Thank you very much for giving us 50 minutes of your time. Please join me in thanking His Excellency. And thank you for coming in such a civilized